Like I know one guy who's got 15 books in progress, and I say to him, look, you need to just stop it. You need to finish one.
In this video, you'll learn tips on how to write a book and self-publish it from Joanna Penn from thecreativepenn.com. Listen to the end to hear her #1 tip on how to make your book not deathly boring. And if you want to write books for a living, make sure to grab the How to Earn a Full-Time Income Writing Books Starter Guide, which is linked in the description below. Today I'm joined by Joanna Penn. Welcome.
Thanks for having me on the show, Felix.
Excited to have you on. So tell us a little bit more about your background and what you do.
Sure. Well, I started out being a cubicle slave, like so many people who want to do a side hustle. And I got to a point where I was so miserable in my job in my sort of early 30s. I got to the point of crying at work. I was so miserable. And yet I was a highly paid consultant at the time, implementing accounts payable into large corporates. I mean, really one of those corporate jobs where they pay you well, but you just feel like, what am I doing with my life? So basically at that point, I started listening to a lot of self-help books. So you can probably tell I'm British, but the Americans do self-help so well. So I was listening to a lot of American self-help audio, and I started to kind of realize that many of the speakers had books. And so I started to read a lot of self-help. And then I thought, I know I could change my own life by writing a self-help book. And so at that point, I'd never written a book. And this was now sort of back in, 10, 11 years ago from when we're talking. I wrote that first book. I put it out there, started self-publishing, and then the Kindle came along. Maybe we can talk about technology changing the world for people who want to do side hustles. But essentially, after I wrote that first book, I started writing more. Within 5 years, I'd quit my job and to go full-time as a creative entrepreneur. I started writing fiction. And at the moment, as we talk, I have 28 books, both fiction and non-fiction. I'm also a speaker and make money from my blog. So essentially, I make, at this point, a multi-six-figure income from my writing. But I started off the first 5 years of my business, it was a side hustle. So I would get up at 5 a.m., go to my day job, come home, do some podcasting or networking or something. At the weekend, I would just work. So yeah, 5 years of side hustle, but now, pretty much been full time for 7.5 years.
That's an amazing story. Thank you for telling us all of that background. So you were reading a lot of self-help books. You were going through this kind of journey yourself to recreate yourself and to learn about how to improve your life. What gave you the confidence to say, hey, I can write this myself as well?
I'm a bit of let's say a square, which in England is, someone who likes studying. And I think a lot of people who probably are listening to this show, you have to want to educate yourself if you want to change careers. So I was trying to educate myself out of a job I'd been in for 13 years. I didn't have any education in entrepreneurship. My degree is in theology or religion. I didn't have any of that education. So I needed to re-educate myself. So I didn't have the confidence. And one of the things I learned with the self-help stuff was about affirmations and about kind of saying in your brain, I am going to do this, or I am this. And I used to say, I am an author. And then I started saying, I make a living with my writing. So I said that for years before it came true, but it's also saying it, but also taking action towards it. So what happened was I didn't have any confidence. I started educating myself. I started saying my affirmations, taking action, and thus it happens. What I would say to people right up front is, at the beginning, you think it's going too slowly. You're just wondering what the hell's going on. Maybe you're making $10 a month extra, and you just go, why is this so slow? But then it just starts speeding up and speeding up. So that's a bit of encouragement for listeners.
Got it. So in your situation and others that you've seen, it's a slow going at first to kind of push that ball and push that, that stone up the hill. But then once it starts rolling faster.
Absolutely. And obviously you're learning more, but also and we'll come to this, but you're creating more products, you're creating, you're doing more marketing, you're learning more skills. And we're also so lucky, like back on the technology, every day there's more and more technology to help us. Like when I started podcasting back in 2009, I phoned someone up on a phone, like an old phone, and put it on speakerphone and held a recorder next to the phone. And now we're on Hangouts or the Skype or the Zoom. And I mean, things have changed so that doing an international digital or physical product, drop ship, print on demand products, you can do this just from a laptop. So yeah, as things change, like, you have to keep learning, but as things speed up, you will find that your brain speeds up too. It's all very exciting. As you can tell, I love what I do, and I really want people to kind of feel that and want to get out there.
Now, I can certainly see the excitement when you talk about this. And before we got on and started recording, we were talking about that there is a vast difference between the nonfiction versus the fiction world in terms of the types of books and types of marketing you have to approach. And for this particular video, we're going to focus on the nonfiction. But for anyone out there who's not sure which side they want to focus on, how do you usually educate people on how can they decide they should go down the nonfiction versus the fiction route?
Well, it's first of all, I would say, what do you love and what are you aiming for? So, for example, if you want to make a living with fiction, it will probably take you a lot longer because you need a lot more books. The myth of writing your first novel and making $1 million is sadly a myth. Whereas with non-fiction books, non-fiction fits very well with an established business or with other income streams. So I suspect, like many people, when I started out, my first goal was to get out of my job. Like, it really was. I wanted to write for love. I wanted to write the novels that I really love, but I knew that I needed to make money. I wanted to give up my job. So if you're listening and you're someone who actually can cope with their job, I'd suggest you just hold on to it and build up this side hustle on the side. But if you're desperate to get out, then nonfiction is really good. So for example, if you write a nonfiction book, you can't sell that for much money. A book's like, an ebook might be $5, $10, a print book $10, $20, but that's it. But you can turn that book into a multimedia course, which, as we know, courses now online with a service like Teachable, you can sell those all over the world for a much higher margin. You can also be a professional speaker and charge money for your speaking services. You can run live workshops. You can sell physical products. You can blog. You can turn that into affiliate income, which is commission on products or services. And you'll probably cover all of those on other shows. But what I think the key to being a writer and to making a living with your writing is multiple streams of income. So for me, I make money from book sales, so ebook, print book, audiobook. I also make money from affiliate sales, from speaking, from podcast sponsorship, from course sales. So I have a course on how to write a novel and how to write a nonfiction book. So I teach. All of these different things are based off my books. Now with fiction, it really is just based on the books. So you have to have a lot more. But those are some ideas of how you can make multiple streams of income from nonfiction books.
That makes a lot of sense. So you, in your beginning of your journey, you were educating yourself and then taking what you were learning and then creating your own version. Is that an approach that you take today? Is an approach that you recommend for anyone that is trying to choose a topic or maybe has chosen a topic and doesn't know where to begin? Do you just recommend they devour the topic in other books and then start from that point?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you've done this with Shopify, right? I mean, you weren't born knowing Shopify. It's something you learn and then you teach others. And I think this is where nonfiction often comes from. It comes from a desire to learn about a particular area. Or if you're someone who's listening and let's say you work in a consultancy and you do communication, you could write a book about what you already know. So either write about what you already know or something you want to learn about. So I started my website, thecreativepenn.com, pen with a double N, which is really my name. I started that in 2008 because I wanted to learn how to write, how to market, how to publish. And that turned into a career over 10 years because I just shared what I learned along the way. And that's probably a good secret to nonfiction, whether it's books, courses, podcasting, whatever, YouTube. If you start to share what you learn, you'll always be 1 or 2 steps ahead of someone else. So even if, right at the beginning, you're sharing, like maybe you sell your first product on Shopify and then you put a video out about it, you're actually closer to the process than someone who might be years ahead. I mean, I know now at the point where I've written 28 books, it's quite hard for me now to feel the same way as someone who might be writing their first book. So that would be some encouragement for you listening. If you are feeling like, well, I don't know enough, I'm not an expert, I don't have a PhD in that topic, well, don't worry, share what you know and put it out there, and you will attract people who want to learn about that topic. Different voices are really important. So whether I'm British, I'm a British white woman teaching writing, whoever you are in the world, your voice will be different to my voice. So, and I'm in my 40s, I'm Generation X, so wherever you are, you're going to have a different point of view, and that will be just as valuable, and you'll attract a different audience.
Yeah, there's a lot of this kind of this negative self-talk about how I'm not an expert, I'm not in a position to teach other people. But I've also heard the other phrase, which is what I think you're going after as well, which is that you want to lead from the middle. It's a lot easier to relate to your audience, especially if your audience are also beginners. If you are just recently learning about this topic or recently going through the same struggles that they are currently going through, it's a lot easier to relate in that situation than if you are, many years ahead and you're just so far ahead that you forgot what it feels like, you forgot the struggles that your audience are going through. And that's particularly important in the nonfiction world.
I'll just add, this is another little tip, because the Creative Pen was my third website. This is a really big deal. Do not set up a website or an online presence that will date, because what will happen is you will grow out of it. You will get bored, and you will then discover that you have to change what you do. So you have to start your website all over again because you've either outgrown it or the language has changed or something. So I would suggest building a personal brand based website where you can pivot into different things. So of course that might not be relevant for everybody, but if you can, the Creative Pen with a double N means I can do anything with that site for the rest of my life, pretty much, as long as it's creative, which it will be. but I could have started the self-publishing website, but that's I'm way beyond that now. So that's another little tip for people. Be very careful about starting a site and a business around where you are right now, because in 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, you will be way beyond that.
Makes sense. So you mentioned that you've written 28 books now. Can you give us a breakdown of that timeline? Like how many books were you able to write in that first year? And is it easier today to produce more books?
Yeah, so that first book took 2.5 years. I think my second book took 14 months, and I just started a book last week and I'm 25,000 words in, so I will have finished that in a couple of weeks' time. It's like anything, you learn the skills that relate to what you're doing, and then it's a lot quicker, and marketing is a lot quicker, writing's a lot quicker, and ideas come. Like I remember when I never thought I would ever have any ideas, and then you start expressing your ideas, and then more of them come, and then the problem is dealing with so many ideas. But it's you do just have to get into this. So in terms of my process, what I would say to people just starting out is the process for writing nonfiction, first of all, is filling your brain. The writer's block with nonfiction is often because you haven't got enough information, and you don't just, like nonfiction, you don't make it up. Obviously, you take it from your own experience, but also the world. So you do your research, you read other books, you do all the things that you need to do, and then you turn that into a book. So the software I really recommend is called Scrivener, and it is just fantastic software, amazing for nonfiction because you can write out of order. And this is another really key point. Do not try and start by writing the introduction to your book. The introduction is the thing you write last. So what you generally do with nonfiction, you just go, okay, so I'm going to write this chapter because that's on my mind. And then you write a different chapter and things just emerge. And then eventually you organize it. And Scrivener is great because you can drag and drop it around. So that would be another tip for writing that first book. Don't think you have to do it in a linear order. Just get it down, brainstorm it, fill in the blanks, and order later.
What is the most common reason you see people giving up during this writing process, and what do you recommend as a way to avoid that pitfall?
People are like, oh yeah, when I have time I'll write a book, or oh yeah, I'll just write a book this weekend. it's very easy for you and I to have a human conversation, but our sentences are not properly formed. If somebody reads the transcript to this, it's going to be full of filler words. It doesn't necessarily make sense if you're reading it, but as a human conversation, it makes sense. So this is the challenge with a book. We're still in an education system where people are used to a book being a type of thing. So even if you've got hours and hours of talks and transcripts and videos and audios, that does not easily lend itself to just copying and pasting into a book. The same with a blog. A book is a journey. You have to take the reader from where they are to where you want them to get to. You have to basically control their mind for a period of time. So you can't just jump from one topic to another. You have to lead them through a linear structure. So this is very challenging. So the biggest reason people give up with nonfiction books is because they find it's harder than they expected. Because what's in your head does not necessarily emerge onto the page perfectly formed. So that is another little tip, okay? So the first draft is not a finished book. This is, you are not going to stream what's on your head into perfectly formed sentences on the page. That just doesn't happen. The process is called editing. So once you've got a first draft, you go through and edit it, and sometimes you edit it over and over again. You can work with professional editors, people who can help you, but that's definitely a big one. I would just circle back on what you said about experts, because I did a survey on my website and over 50% of respondents said they weren't writing because they didn't consider themselves an expert. So that's just huge. So that's a big mindset block. And I have actually written a book on the author mindset, because so often everything's in your mind. But as we said, you can help people with where you are and your personal story. And that is incredibly valuable. So don't let that fear stop you, that mindset. And also you can learn the process, and you can hire editors to help you with your language.
For you, what was the hardest book or topic that you had to write about?
Well, I think that mindset book was pretty hard. And what I tend to do with my nonfiction is I write the book I need to write for myself. So I was coming up particularly against fear of judgment. So I write, some of my books are quite dark. So I have a book called Desecration, which is understandably dark. My last book, Map of Shadows, is also pretty dark. So it's in the dark fantasy / horror category. Now you can tell I'm a smiley, happy person, right? So for people to read my book and then think, oh my goodness, is there something wrong with her? She has a dark little mind. She's like Stephen King. The fear of people judging me like that was really hard. But when I wrote The Successful Author Mindset, I went through my journals. So I have lots of journals. I've been writing for years, and I picked out aspects of my journals and shared my journey. And what I found is that people felt exactly the same way. And this is why it's so important for everyone to get their individual voice out there, because your experience of the world is completely different to somebody else's. But we still have common issues as humans. We still have fear of failure, fear of judgment. We still have all these common issues, but we have individual experiences. So that was probably the hardest nonfiction for me.
But what is your daily routine like to make sure that you have a productive day when you are in writing mode?
I still have a pretty similar routine to when I had a day job. And this is another really interesting tip. When your side hustle turns into a real job, you realize that you still have to have a routine. You can't just be like, oh yay, I'm free, I can do whatever I want. No, you still have to do the hours. So basically I work in the morning. I do a couple of hours of writing. So I do fiction in the mornings. So I go to a cafe and write. So you're interviewing me in my home office, but I get away from this physical location to write my fiction. So I did 2.5 hours at the cafe this morning. Then I go and do some exercise. This is really important too. You have to be a healthy entrepreneur, otherwise you're just going to burn out and be miserable. And what's the point in that? Then I come back, I do a bit of admin, emails, running a business, as well as doing the creative work. This is really important too. You have to keep on top of the accounts and the marketing and interviews and stuff. Then in the afternoon, I do another block of creative work. So this afternoon, I did another couple of hours of dictation. So I will dictate first draft, and then I come back and do things like interviews and stuff. So I pretty much have a couple of creation blocks, and then I have a couple of marketing and business blocks during the day. And when I had a day job, so people listening, obviously it's a side hustle, I would get up at 5 a.m. and whatever time, if you have kids, maybe it's earlier, but that creative work for me was always in the morning. And then I would go to work and spend all day at work, and I'd get home and I'd be knackered. So in the evenings, that's when I would do the non-creative work. So I started my podcast, my YouTube channel, my website, or when I had a day job. So I would do creation in the morning, then go to work, then come home, do marketing. And at the weekend, I would do a bit of both. So you do have to find time for both the creation and the marketing.
Yeah, I like that approach of spending the most valuable, the time where you have the most energy on the thing that you want to really work on. And your situation was the side hustle that eventually turned to a business. You prioritized that and made that the first thing that you spent your time on, because that's where you have the most energy, and that's where it seemed to work for you in terms of the creative side. Have you ever started writing a book that you then decided that this is not something I want to finish and then pivot to a different topic?
No. One of the things I think is very important is finishing work. This is one of the temptations. I haven't done it for books, but as I said, The Creative Pen was my third blog. And I've started other blogs since, I've started other YouTube channels since, and I've given those up. So I'm not saying never give things up, but the process of writing a book, especially your first book, finishing that book is incredibly important. If you don't finish it, even if you're feeling like it's a pile of crap, you may never write another book. I know too many authors who have, I know one guy who's got 15 books in progress. And I say to him, look, you need to just stop it. You need to finish one. And so he's obviously got a block in terms of that finishing energy. And the truth is that this is, this side hustle idea, I love it, but it's hard. It's much easier just to do your work, go home and watch TV. Like, it really is. So you have to have the drive to see this through, and you have to really want whatever this other thing is. And I think if you want to be a writer, you have to push through that first book and finish it, whatever it is. Even, as I say, if it's a pile of crap, you don't have to publish it, or you could publish it under another name. But what I would say is another big tip: non-fiction books do not have to be long. So don't look on the shelf in Barnes & Noble and go, oh, look, the latest New York Times best-selling non-fiction book, like Sapiens by Yuval Noah Harari, which has won all these awards. Amazing book, but it's like massive. Okay, you don't have to do that. You've had a look at my book, How to Make a Living with Your Writing. It's 27,000 words, which is not long at all. It's about a fifth of the size of a book like Sapiens. So what I would say to people is, if you have this block around, oh my goodness, I have to write 70,000 words or whatever, don't. Just write a short, useful book with no filler. I mean, we've all read these non-fiction books that are just full of stuff which should have been cut out, right? So don't write that in the first place. And you will find it much easier to finish a book that is, say, 30,000 words than trying to write like a massive magnum opus.
What do you think makes it so hard to finish a book? It sounds like it's easier to start than it is to finish. Like, why is that? The writing, you're still writing, but how come writing at the end is harder than at the beginning?
Well, the writing process, as I said, has a few steps. There's three main processes of writing. So the starting, some people find starting hard, and then in the middle, it's often called the saggy middle, because actually the middle can be really hard. I find the middle hard. I can start, I can finish, but the middle, I'm like, okay, I just need to plow on, because you lose that immediacy of excitement, and you're like, oh goodness, I have to write some more chapters. And then the finishing energy is a lot about the mindset. It's about the confidence. It's about the fear of putting it out there. Especially if you're putting a book out under your own name, what about if your loved ones hate it? What if they sue you? What if it makes no money? What if it makes loads of money? What if you get trolled on social media? What if it's a complete waste of time and nobody cares? Which, is quite possible. There are challenges at different parts of the process. The other thing with finishing energy is, when you finish that first draft, you still have to edit the book. The unfortunate truth is, when you start off as a new writer, the editing process may take as long or longer than the writing process. So there are a lot of skills to learn. You know this. You're basically educating yourself into a new life, and you have to look at that as a positive thing. And I can tell you, as someone who's been an avid reader since I could read, I love reading. And when I thought about what I wanted to do with my life, it was, I want to read and I want to create books. That's what I want to do with my life. So if people listening, if you feel that, then that's going to carry you through the difficult times. That will help you past that finishing point. And I can tell you, I've got my books behind me here, holding a book in your hand and saying, I made this. That is one of the best feelings. And that's why I left my job, because now I measure my life by what I create, and that carries you through the difficult times.
Now, how do you know when you are done? How do you know that, okay, this book is done? Not so much the editing phase, but at least the writing phase, when you know, okay, I'm ready to begin the next stage of this book.
Your first draft, you need to think about it from the reader's point of view. So, for example, I do have a book called How to Write a Non-Fiction Book. And so obviously it's got to take people from having not got a clue about writing all the way through to finishing a manuscript. So I know where the person is and I know where they are going to end up. Your first draft is only finished when you have satisfied the journey of the reader. And the other thing is that you have to actually have written full sentences throughout the whole book. So, for example, often you might have insert research here or get diagram for this bit. Okay, when you still have all that in, your first draft is not finished. But when you can read it end to end and there's no insert this, then that's a first draft. And then what I do is I print it out actually physically. Again, I'm Gen X. Maybe if you're younger, you might just do it on a tablet or something. But I print it out by hand and I will edit it by hand. And that process, you often have to do a lot of restructuring. There's lots of arrows. There's lots of, I really need another chapter on this. Really thinking about all the different things that might make the book better for the reader. Because when you're doing it as the first draft, you're often in your own head, you're thinking about you. But when you're doing your editing, you have to start thinking, well, what if I just give it to random person? How will they know what that means? Am I using jargon? Am I using words that don't make sense? And then you move into an editing process. So that's what I would say. You kind of have to have a goal for your book, and it has to be a goal for the reader. And then you can move into really finessing that book.
And what about the editing process? What is that like? What kind of questions do you ask yourself as you are reading through your first draft and editing?
Okay, so the self-editing process, one really important question for non-fiction. Is this book completely boring? How many books have we read that are just deathly? And this is why you, as the person, it's so important that you include your own personal journey. So in my book, How to Write Non-Fiction, I actually open with the point where a non-fiction book changed my life, where I decided to be child-free by choice, which is a very big life choice that was sparked by reading a non-fiction book. So I open the book with a personal experience, and then I use my personal experiences throughout the book. Even when I'm talking about how to, I'm still using personal analogies. You can also use quotes from different books. There are lots of things that you can do to bring the book alive so it's not deathly boring. Obviously, you'll need to do fact checking depending on what type of book you're writing. What I would say, like a big tip, if you are doing some kind of technical manual, be very careful. So I know people who've written books on, say, Facebook marketing, and then next week, Facebook looks completely different. So what I would say is aim to write things that don't age really quickly. For things that age faster, consider doing blog posts or links within the book that go to tutorials that you can update much faster than a book, because you will want to do print books. And although with print on demand, you can update things, you might also want to do audiobooks. So think about principles and things that don't age. So when you're going through the editing process, the self-editing, you're really querying the journey of the reader. Does this make sense? Fixing all of that. And then once you've finished the self-edit, so you've made all the changes to your manuscript, you're then, I would recommend engaging a professional editor. And whether or not you are pitching for a traditional publishing deal or you're going to self-publish, then I suggest you do get a professional editor, because that will be the single biggest thing that will improve your book. I have links, on my site. We can put them in the show notes for editors, and that then when you work with somebody else, because you do get to a point where you just cannot stand this manuscript anymore, you're like, I don't want to see it again. That's the point where you probably need to either rest it or work with a professional to take it to the next level, and then they will suggest changes and you make those changes.
How much can that cost? Like, what's the budget for someone that wants to hire a professional editor?
Okay, so it really depends. Say you're a journalist and you've written a 25,000 word book. If you're a journalist, you already have writing skills and you're writing in English as your first language. Maybe you don't even need a copy edit. Maybe you need a proofreader. So that might cost, let's say, a couple of $100. Compare that to a first-time author who's written 90,000 words. They're not very confident in English, or their grammar isn't great. That could cost a couple of thousand. So it will be based on word count. It will be based on the skill of the editor. It will be based on the type of edit. So there's structural edits, content edits, the classic red pen, line edits. Then there's proofreading. So for example, I'm at the point now where for my nonfiction books, I only use a proofreader. So I don't use an editor, I use a proofreader, which is a kind of a type of editor, but they do a final read of the book and fix typos and grammar and stuff. I would also point out a tool called Grammarly, which can really help. And I've got a tutorial on that. Again, we can put it in the show notes. But Grammarly can really help you if you just feel like your sentences are appalling. Then it can help educate you as to how to write better active language, for example, rather than passive. It helps me with things like commas. Readers expect a level of quality with their book. And I'm an independent author. I run my own publishing company because I'm a businesswoman and I make 70%. But I still want my products to be as professional as the top New York Times bestsellers.
So you mentioned Scrivener, you mentioned Grammarly. Any other apps or tools that you rely on to help you in the writing process specifically?
In the writing process, not so much in the writing process itself. Scrivener really is my number one tool. Grammarly I use on the editing phase, and then I use Vellum to do formatting. So again, I've got a tutorial on that. It's for Mac, but you can use Mac in Cloud for PC users. And essentially it is beautiful formatting for ebooks and print books. So it means you can output the files that you can then use to publish on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, all the different, iBooks, etc., etc.
So for someone out there that is wanting to write their very first book and they have a side hustle that they want to start in this realm, how should they spend, let's say they have an hour a day to spend on this, how should they spend that hour?
So let's say that you are selling yoga mats on Shopify, for example, that you're going to sell physical yoga mats that you're getting made in China and selling on Shopify. You know that you need to establish yourself as like a brand that people want to buy yoga mats from. So what book could you write that will get you noticed by people who buy yoga mats? But in that example, you would spend your first couple of weeks, presumably you're doing this for your website. So this is the thing, it all needs to go together. So you're doing your SEO research, your search engine optimization research, both on keywords for your website, but also on Amazon. So Amazon is a search engine. Change the search to Kindle and books, and then look at what search terms people are actually looking for in the book space. And it will likely be, people won't be searching for a book on yoga mats, right? The product will be yoga mats, but maybe the book is, 30 yoga poses for busy professional women. And that will give you a very specific target audience that then you can put in your book. You can put and maybe you link to videos on YouTube with you on the yoga mat doing your thing. So that's just one example. This is really important with nonfiction. You must do your SEO research on Amazon as well as for your website on places like Google. Then I would say you need to really think about brand and how it relates to your other income streams. So what if you want to be a speaker? Well, then you're not going to be doing yoga poses. Maybe you'll be talking more about ways that yoga can invigorate the corporate environment. Maybe being a thought leader, that would lend itself more to speaking. So you really need to spend the first couple of weeks being strategic about what you want to achieve with that book and come up with the various things people are looking for. And then you can start writing. And the first thing you would then do is brainstorm your table of contents and think about your ecosystem as well. This is really important. So your ecosystem in that example might be a physical yoga mat, an ebook on yoga poses, a set of videos with yoga poses, and a website with your brand on doing things on yoga mats.
The book is just the beginning, but you have to start even before that. You have to be very methodical and conscious about what kind of topics, what are you writing in the book, because that can lead to other opportunities to turn that book into other income streams. So let's say you start with the book. How do you begin down this process of turning it into, let's say, a course? So what is your process there?
Well, I should just say the way I just described is the best way if you can. The other way is I really love this topic and I just want to write a book on it. So I call those the kind of the top-down approach versus the bottom-up approach. So the top-down approach is what we've just described. Come up with the strategy and then fill in the blanks with all your products. The bottom-up is I really love this thing. I'm going to write a book on it anyway and figure out the money later. That's another way. But in terms of your question, turning things into courses, I would suggest doing it almost at the same time. So, and actually some people do the course first and turn the course into the book. Other people do the book first and turn the book into the course. I've done both and I've found it easier to turn the book into the course because taking a transcript and turning it into book writing is quite difficult, whereas it's easier to go the other way. When you're thinking about your chapters, they don't need to be long. This is another thing with nonfiction. You can have quite short chapters. They can be to the point. For example, the mindset book, fear of failure. That's a very obvious chapter. Talk about the problem with fear of failure, talk about the solution with how you get over fear of failure. That's a nice little lesson in a course. When you're doing audiobooks are quite different to courses. So audiobooks are like a read of the book and you often have to reformat your book for audio. So if people want to get into audiobooks, which are a huge growth market, that's something else to think about. I would just suggest with nonfiction and a side hustle focused nonfiction is really just consider that ecosystem of where you want to get to and what you want to achieve with that book. Let's take our yoga example again, 30 yoga poses for professional business women. Then maybe you then do 30 yoga poses for pregnant women, because maybe some of those women go on. Millennial men, you can look at different demographics. You can look at who are the different types of audience you're aiming for? Who are you talking to? And that target audience, again, with any side hustle is so important. Who are the people you are looking for? So for my Joanna Penn books, it's obviously people who want to write books. They're my target audience. But for my JF Penn, for my fiction side, it's kind of people who like thrillers and Con Air, which is definitely too early for you. But, and people who like Stephen King, these are very different demographics. So you have to think about who am I aiming for? How can I serve that community? And also, I guess, how can I network with other people in that community?
Thanks for watching. If you want to learn how to write books for a living, make sure to grab the How to Earn a Full-Time Income Writing Books Starter Guide in the description below. And if you want to learn more about earning a full-time income writing books, make sure to check the next video in this series.